Today on the Hogsty, longtime friend of the show Keith McMillan joins us to talk about the Post's coverage of the team, the never-ending deluge of Robert Griffin articles, and to help us break down the tight end position group. Keith orchestrates the Post sports department's Redskins coverage primarily in the news and the blog, so he is an awesome resource for us here on the Hogsty. We are real thankful to have him for this full docket today, so we'll get right to it. We'll be right back with Keith McMillan of the Washington Post next.
Welcome to the Hogsty with your crew, Alex Zeese, Steve Thomas, and Robbie Duncan. And now, here's your host, Sean Conti.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, Sean Conti here, host of the Hogsty, back for another episode today. Really excited. We have a cool guest with us, as I just explained. We'll get to meeting him in just a second. But Steve Thomas, how are you today on this 100-degree weather here in D.C.?
Well, I feel very good, because I'm in Texas, as you guys know, and we've had at least 3 days straight of no rain. So it's just amazing. I went outside. I noticed every yard in the neighborhood had grass a foot high. Right. This has been raining for 2 weeks straight, but it's a bright and sunny day today, so it's a good thing.
Yeah, you gotta do what I did just now and get out there and mow that lawn. Because
that's right.
I felt dehydrated because I was out there for 20 minutes. And
would it be less manly if I admitted that we have a company that does it for us, or should I not admit that?
Oh, Steve.
Would it be very unmanly if I admitted that we don't actually own a lawnmower?
Jesus, wow. Steve. What kind of red-blooded American are you?
I'm just saying, if I admitted that, would that be less manly? That's all I'm saying.
If you admitted that, yes, that would be significantly less manly.
Okay, well, we won't admit that then.
This means Steve has nice property.
Yeah,
that's right.
He's
too big for him to do himself.
He's the one of us that has nice property.
Yeah. This is why we have to give Steve a hard time.
But I'm also the one that has a 43-mile commute every day, one way. So.
Plus,
I spend at least 3 hours on the car every day.
Well, yeah, Andy's in Houston, so every day a punishment.
Yes. Well, I could.
I expected more impassioned defense.
No, there's no defense, man. I'm here because of the job. If I could be in D.C. with you guys, I'd be there in a heartbeat.
Totally. Yeah. Well, what's up, Alex? How are you today, man?
I'm doing good, man. Like I said, I already spent some time out in this weather. I've baked, so I'm good.
Yeah. How about you, Keith? Are you surviving this brutal heat today?
Yeah. Well, I'm in the air conditioning, so I'm great right now. But I got lawn mowing coming up after this. So
just hire somebody, Keith, to do it for you, like I do.
Right. Well, my patch of grass is too small. In fact, I don't even have a gas mower. I got one of those push mowers because by the time I gas it up and prime it, I could be done.
Are you talking about one of the ones with the spinning blades, where that's like the old-fashioned one from the '60s?
Yes, it takes me 10 minutes to mow my lawn, front and back. I have a small patch of grass. That's it.
I'm in the same boat. I'm in a townhouse. I just use a weed whacker for the whole thing.
Yeah, right. We got too much grass for that for our house.
Pair of scissors.
But if you got rolling hills like Steve, you might need to have a riding mower or a company.
There are no hills in Houston.
The golf course right there. He's got to take care of every time.
Well, we do actually live across the street from a golf course, but I don't have to mow it.
You would live there, Steve. You would live by a golf course.
Hey, I killed a water moccasin on my front yard on the porch a week ago, so that's the downside.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Well, I guess without any further ado, let's get into this, Keith, because we are really thankful and happy to have you on the show again. This is, I think, your third time on the show, so you're like a hardcore friend of the Hogsty, man.
Well, I appreciate it. Look, I'm excited there's only 3 of you today, because normally listening to you with 4 or 5 voices is like listening to the Sports Junkies in D.C. or like listen to the Wu-Tang Clan. There's like 8 guys, and I can't keep track of who's who.
Well, it's funny you say that because Rick Snyder more than once has pointed out that we are the junkie wannabes. I don't know if I'm flattered or insulted by that.
Well, look, they're celebrating their 20th year this year, so if you make it half that long, you guys will be doing great.
I don't think I'll live half that long, frankly.
Not if you got to mow the lawn later in this weather.
Yeah, no. That's right, exactly. Well, look, let's get into we got some questions for you, Keith, because it's not often that we have representatives of the Washington Post here to ask about coverage of the team. So this is a cool opportunity. So I guess the first thing I wanted to ask you, Keith, Is the deluge of Robert Griffin articles ever going to end, man? I feel like we can't get away from them. I feel like every time this dude throws an errant pass in practice, I'm hearing about it. He's throwing balls into his neighbor's yards. It's like, it's everywhere. So do you feel like, from your perspective, being part of the Post, does it seem like, there's still too much of it? I mean, like, what's your take on this?
Well, the short answer is if people stop clicking on it, we'll probably stop writing about it as much. I mean,
it's a fair point.
There's always going to be times where he's newsworthy. For instance, they play week 4, right?
Yeah.
You're going to get a ton of it that week. And I think from our standpoint, a lot of us, we feel the same things probably that fans feel sometimes. You're like, here we go again with this. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, A, it's newsworthy, and B, we live in a time of we have real-time data, what people are interested in on the website, right? And
Mm-hmm.
how arrogant would we have to be to look at the data that everyone is clicking on Robert Griffin and is saying, people don't want to read any more of that, so we're not going to do any more of it. So to some degree, you do have to take your cues from what people are interested in. Obviously, some people sometimes don't know what they're interested in until we report it when you're talking about like a big, like an investigative project, or you break
Right.
some news that wasn't out there before. But to a certain degree, like for the blog desk that we have, I think they take a lot of their cues from what people are interested in.
And I would bet, too, that a lot of, like mailbag questions are always coming in about Robert Griffin. And, like, I'm sure that your readership is also encouraging, kind of like you said, with people clicking. I mean, it's still a topic in the everyday person's mind. So it kind of makes sense that it stays in the news.
On one hand, you want to put it aside and say, all right, he's someone else's quarterback now.
Right.
Washington has its own franchise quarterbacks, so let's focus on what's going on here. But because of 2012 and 13 and 14 to a degree, because he was so beloved and then so kind of, I don't know, people were tortured about how they felt about him after a while. They liked certain things about him and certain things they didn't like. He's always going to be some kind of connection here. So there will always be some level of interest, even though I think after week 4 this year, probably died down a lot.
I have to ask this, and I don't know if it's even fair to me to ask, but reporters are people too, just like us, just like anybody. We all have biases. We all have our own likes and interests. I do feel like maybe not so much with the Post reporters, but I do feel like there's some local media folks out there that have an agenda, and that for some reason just want to put out bad stuff about this guy. Maybe I'm wrong, and it's maybe I'm perception, because I've been one of Griffin's biggest fans.
About, Steve.
We're talking about Jason Reed, okay? Yeah. Jason Reed wrote the big article, about it, but he's not the only one.
Yeah,
is there a bias?
The Post, but...
Yeah, and is there a bias out there against this guy in the media?
Yeah, bias is kind of a touchy word. Like, people don't necessarily have agenda, whereas I hate this guy and I'm out to get him. But I do think that people form their opinions, especially from talking to this. If you talk to the same sources a lot, you form your opinion. You kind of have your mind made up about a player. And this is just me speaking generally, not really speaking about Jay Reed and Griffin. But it's tough. It's tough, and that's one of the challenges of the job. What we do is to self-analyze and say, am I hitting this thing too hard? Should I, is this? You have to have news judgment. I guess that's like the most important thing. The big, and especially what I get paid to do is not just catch mistakes and guide the future coverage, but to have good judgment about what we should be covering, what we shouldn't be covering.
Right.
How much attention do we pay to something? If you hear a rumor, right, it doesn't mean we just put it in the paper, right? You check with the police, or you check with another source, or whatever it is before you run with it. So I think it's true that we all have our areas maybe where we get stuck focusing too much on the same storyline over and over again, and that's part of the challenge. Part of the challenge for us, in all seriousness, is to always be doing what's relevant, what's important, what people want to read about, and to not repeat yourself and hit the same thing over and over again. And it's hard when you have 8 people covering the team, plus you're competing with however many other outlets are out there, especially when you have a star that becomes so transcendent that it becomes national. Now you're not just competing with Comcast and all the TV stations, but you're competing with ESPN and
they've got Adam Schefter hanging around.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, it really becomes quite a challenge, and it's tough for a reporter to say, I have this piece of information. should I not go with it? Even though I know, I'm liable to get scooped by it. And you have to balance the weight of how important is it to be first? How important is it to be accurate and to be covering the things on the beat that matter?
So, I mean, I don't want to harp on the Griffin thing anymore. And
but yet you're going to. Anyway.
Yeah. But here's my question for you. Just talking about the coverage this year and for the coming season. I guess, one, do you guys have any big changes planned? Like, are we going to... I assume it's going to be the same 3 or 4 everyday reporters still. But anything new you guys are kind of thinking of? I know you got new management, so is there any kind of new ideas that are coming out with that? And especially with things like the London game and Thanksgiving coming up, you got a lot on your plate in terms of big primetime games this year.
Yeah.
I mean, from an editor's standpoint, half of it is trying to cover part of it is covering the right stories. But at this point, it's like logistics. I'm worried about, like, how do we get to people? How we get people to London and how do we get people to the West Coast for night games? And sometimes you don't worry about that stuff till a week of or 2 weeks of. But with London, this is really like the first time you have to think about.
Are you
booking
having to hold
flights.
them off with a stick? Like everybody is everyone trying to go or?
Look, it's actually
everyone trying not to go.
Yeah, it's actually more of the opposite. Not that people don't want to volunteer to work and get paid to fly cross country, but it is a job.
Right.
They're not going to go over there and kick back and eat fish and chips every day, right? They're going to go over there and they're going to be in the hotel. They're going to be at the facility, wherever the facility might be. They're going to, and you don't get to make. The only in this case, you may get to make a little bit of a vacation out of it because the following week is the bye week. You could stay a couple days, but usually they travel and they don't. That grind during the season, being a beat writer, it's not the life. I mean, it's fun, obviously. You could do worse things for work, but I mean, they fly in. They usually fly on Saturday. Stay Saturday night, cover the game Sunday. You could be at the stadium like 14 hours on Sunday,
away from your family the whole weekend.
Right. I mean, and look, I'm not complaining. It's a decent job, but it's a grind. They fly back, and look, it's as far as grinds go, it's nothing compared to baseball or hockey, where you got to go to Edmonton. And then San Jose and Phoenix and Dallas on the same road trip. So
I mean, I know Steve and I have both done a lot of travel for work in our careers, especially worldwide. It is brutal when you have, and I've done like 14-hour plus, plane trips. That is not a fun part of your day.
They aren't vacations, and I think you said it in your last time you were with us, Keith. Actually, once you get over the excitement of being a sports reporter, it becomes more of a job, and which means the London thing, while exciting, becomes more of a hassle than anything else. Because it's not like you're going to be looking at the crown jewels; you're going to be covering the team only in 6 hours away from time zone wise.
Totally, but there is a flip side to it. One thing every reporter roots for, right? You may not root for a particular team, but you root for storylines. And if you're going over to London, especially since they're going over to play a decent team or what we think will be a pretty good Bengals team this year, you got storylines, and that at least there'll always be something to write about because it's unique, and it's midway through the season, probably where you get to the point where it starts to be a little, especially if they're just like 4-3 or 5-2, and they're pretty good, but they're it can get boring. I remember a couple years ago they played like the Titans in week 9 or something, and it was the year they had all the quarterback changes, so we end up having plenty to write about.
But isn't that every year? I mean, that's not 1 year.
I mean, you just look at that game and you go, what are we going to write about that week? The Titans or the Bucks in week 11? How is anybody going to get excited for that game?
That game worked out for you guys. It was an interesting win for the Skins, but
it's I mean, it's well, last year it was. 2 years ago they got drubbed at home,
right?
And So when we look at the schedule, right? You guys are looking at it for which games are sweet Monday night. Oh, we got a Sunday night or Green Bay. I'm going to set up a maybe I'll watch that one with my friends or something. We're just looking at it like, all right, Green Bay. We'll get Rodgers here. That'll be cool. Oh, I don't have to travel for that. We got to go to Oakland on a Sunday night and then come back for a Thursday night game. That's a terrible turnaround. That's the way we look.
Well, now that we've been doing this podcast for over a year, we look at the Monday night games as, oh my God, when are we going to record at midnight?
Yeah. So you have it. You get a taste of what it's like.
We know that's 1/10 of what your guys are going through, though.
Yeah. I mean, it's work. So after it's still a cool job. It's much better than being in the cubicle all day. I'm in the office most of the time, so it's much more fun to be Master or Mike or Liz and be out around the team.
How's that new office space, by the way?
light years different than the old building. The old building was built in the 70s, and it was obviously history was made there. A lot of stuff that even predates me or anything I knew about. But just coming into a new space, it's good for morale. Anything at work where something good is happening at work and people aren't getting laid off. New space. I think that stuff is just it's always good.
Sure.
Yeah. Oh yeah. New energy. So you made an interesting point a couple of minutes ago, actually, that I wanted to ask about in terms of general coverage of the team. You're kind of beholden, obviously, to what people want to hear about, what people click on. That kind of dictates, to an extent, what you need to cover, because that's where people's interests are. So my question to you is, as someone who knows about football and who knows about the team, what do you wish you could cover more often that you feel like there's just not enough of an audience for? I mean, what do you wish you could cover that you can't because, public opinion or attention is elsewhere?
I think the hard thing about being the Post is you have to be everything to everyone, right? You have to write the very simple general articles. For instance, if we put something on A1, it has to have kind of less sportsy language than if we put it on D1, right, at the front of the paper, because for a more general audience. It's for people who get the Post for the politics and just happen to be reading about the Redskins today. I love the X's and O's stuff. The stuff that Mark does, the stuff when Mike does observations. That I just love all the football stuff, and I'm fascinated by the inner workings of the team, and I get fascinated with different kinds of things. Liz comes up with these great story ideas about like she did one year about how Ryan Clark and Santana Moss, they're both 35, how they stay healthy basically during training camp. They're grinding, and like Ryan Clark every practice would sit on this cooler, and he was always pulling drinks out of the cooler, and she's like, well, what is that? And that kind of thing leads to stories that we would have no idea that we're interested in. But I mean, how you balance what to cover. I mean, I think part of our challenge is just to be we got to be everything to everyone. You have to have game stories, columns, analysis, and X's and O's, and we got to explain stuff, not just what happened, but why this happened and why it's important.
Well, first of all, whatever Ryan Clark was doing with the drinks when he was here didn't really help him much on the field, I like to point out. But more importantly than that, Scott McMillan has got what seems now a lifetime pass from the fans. He can do no wrong, and he has done very well in terms of player acquisition. What I wonder is, from your perspective as the media outlet, has his influence on the team extended to your coverage? Is there a different vibe around Redskins Park and when dealing with the media as a result of his influence and his leadership?
The vibe's very different. Part of it is public, like you can see the difference. You guys can tell. The teams run in a different manner. I would say more organized manner, a more kind of a confident, successful. Just knowing someone who's done this before, who's built a Super Bowl team before, who's upfront about the way he builds, and he says he's going to do something, and then generally follows through. You're like. Yeah. So I think the overall atmosphere last year, like if you go back to the beginning of last year, remember the Lions game in the preseason, and Griffin got beat up in the first couple series. And then there was the Thursday they said he got cleared by a doctor, but then Friday the doctor was like, I didn't clear anybody, or whatever the story was at the time. And it
seemed like a huge mess.
Look, and then Cousins replaced Griffin on August 31st. So literally last year it was August, and I was like, this is already a circus. It's just the same old. It's the same old Redskins. Every year it's just a circus. They find ways to make news out of things that you think wouldn't be newsworthy. Well, pretty much from that point on, there was the one thing with Scott and his wife. And that came,
but that was more National Enquirer than anything that was really relevant, though.
Right. That all came up, and then from that point on, from the time the games began, it was about football. From the entire season, you didn't have one circus atmosphere type of incident, and a lot of it was I'm sure because Griffin had been benched, and he kind of made a point to stay out of the spotlight and not say anything incendiary. But I mean, that is the main influence on what McMillan has done to change the way we cover the team. Like you can try to influence the coverage, but really it's the news, it's what happens or the lack of it that influenced it the most.
That has to make your life so much easier, by the way, when it's just you guys can focus on the game.
Yeah, of course. Of course. Now, again, we root for storyline. So if it is a circus, it's great because everyone's clicking on it and we're busy and we feel relevant. Mm-hmm. But I mean, it's
like the fans want to hang themselves, when all that's going on, though. That's the problem.
Look, after a while, it gets just as tiring for the reporters as well because now they got something crazy happens. They got to take quit eating dinner and text 10 people and make 3 phone calls to make sure did this thing really happen? Is that true?
Did Roger Goodell die like that fake tweet had?
Well, it's always nice when you can sort it out real quickly. But the other thing I think about Scott that is good for us, and we kind of knew it was going to be like this because Jerry had dealt with him in Seattle. Jerry Brewer, the new columnist, came to us. Well, he's been a year now, so he's not new. But he came from the Seattle Times, and so he covered Scott in Seattle. So we kind of had an idea how he was going to be to deal with. But he's a straight shooter. Like sometimes you'll get a tip on something, and you just want to be able to ask somebody within the team, "Hey, are we on the right track? Or are we not on the right track? Am I wasting my time here?" And he doesn't. I just don't think he doesn't lie. If he said, "Look, I can't tell you that," at least he can't tell you that, and then you don't waste your time. It's not like someone who just won't text you back or won't answer your question or will answer your question in a deflecting sort of way. And he's this way at the podium. He said, "Hey, look, I'm trying to get more picks during the draft," and then he doesn't say that he's going to try to get 12 picks, and then all of a sudden he changes his mind and he trades up for the first. Like he's pretty much a straight shooter, and for us that's helpful because all we're after is the truth.
Sure. Well, yeah, I mean, of course, he's not going to disclose everything to you. He's not going to disclose his draft strategy to the media, I don't think.
No, everybody understands that, but I think reporters hate having their time wasted.
Well, I don't know if fans do understand that, because they're convinced that there is no priority list. Some fans are convinced that there's no draft priority list, that, the only thing that's happening is the absolute very best player, no matter what else is going to come in the Redskins part. I think Scott has a strategy. He's just not going to disclose it, and it's going to include various factors, not just the raw talent, I would assume.
Absolutely. And the one thing about him is, I don't think this is all, I don't talk to him directly. I talk to my reporters or the columnists who sometimes talk to him. Obviously they talk to other people at Redskins Park as well, but I get the sense that, and this is maybe a departure from previous regimes, is that they didn't think, 9-7, okay, we made it. Like we're good now. We don't have to keep building. Like I think they're looking at this thing 2, 3, 4 years out. So when you look at a draft pick and you go, well, that guy doesn't fit right now. Well, that's because he doesn't fit right now, but he may fit in a year or two when certain people age out or their production declines or or their contract becomes too much to handle.
You're talking about Josh Doxson's draft and the existence of Pierre Garçon and Deshaun Jackson, right?
That's the main idea I had in mind, but I don't think that's the only the only example of him trying to build. He's building for this year, but he's also building for next year and 2 years out and 3 years out too. I think that's what's really and that's the way well-run teams are run.
Yeah.
This is off the beaten path, and nor was it on our agenda, but hopefully you'll know. Last year I think the Redskins almost got trapped into Hard Knocks. The Texans got it at the very end. Yeah. This year it's the Rams because that's a good story.
I was all for that last year, by the way. It
would have been interesting to watch, but I was against it from the team perspective. I'm going to assume that Scott McMillan and company would hate the idea of Hard Knocks. Is that right?
I don't know that for a fact, but I know that probably most teams probably don't want to do it. It's just a hassle to have there, have the extra cameras. Probably the teams who want to volunteer for it are like your Dallas Cowboys type teams who love the publicity, and then your your teams who need the publicity. I'm sure the Jaguars would want to do it. I'm sure
it's always the team that everybody talks about. When you have small market teams that need publicity, the Jaguars is on top of every single list.
Sure,
absolutely. Look, and on the flip side, HBO doesn't want the Jag. They can't sell. They can't say get excited about Blake Bortles. So they want something with a storyline. And so the tough balance with that is to try to find something that HBO can get excited about, and then something that a team that wants to do it. Mm-hmm. And when they put those rules in a couple years ago, it narrows it right down to like 8 teams right away, and then it's very easy to discern. All right, these 3 would be interesting. The rest of these are kind of boring.
I thought the Texans were pretty boring last year, honestly.
Yeah. Well, they didn't have a quarterback,
except for the scrap.
The scrap.
Just a lot of fighting. Yeah. And Hopkins, breaking D'Angelo Hall's ankle.
Well, it's like, how many times can we see J.J. Watt work out? I just got bored with the whole thing at the end of it all. Now, there was a couple, 2 weeks ago now, there was a really big topic that came out of the Washington Post. The Washington Post conducted a poll of...
It lit up the world.
500 or so Native Americans regarding their feelings on the name. What was your involvement in that poll?
Little to none.
Okay.
It was a project done by Metro. So
Okay.
I work in sports, and they obviously let us know it was coming down the pike, and we had a hand in promoting it and gathering the reaction from players and that sort of thing. But they Metro worked on that for several, months, or I don't know if it was more than a year that it took to do the poll. They did it, with a scientific
method,
a polling sample.
Yeah.
We actually used to have a huge polling, or not huge, but we had a polling department that would do things like this. But anyway, my involvement in it, I found out about it not all that long before public found out about it. But I think it was they did some things in the project that I think had always needed to be done. One is obviously
ask the big question.
It was important to update the 2004 survey that had come. Tons of polls have been done between them, but the one that everyone kept on going back to was the Annenberg one in 2004. So it was important to, that's now 12 years ago. So it was important to update that. It was important to, we all know what we all think. We've done polls of Washingtonians, you've done polls of Redskins fans, but how do people who identify as Native American, how do they feel about it? Because it's probably most important to talk to them. So I thought my favorite part of the project personally was when they let people in their own words say how they felt about it.
And I think stuff, yeah.
Look, sometimes as journalists, I don't think we do that enough. We go to our official sources, and you deal with the same kind of newsmakers all the time, and sometimes you got to forget there's hundreds of thousands, millions of people out there that have opinions on things who these things matter to, that we don't get a chance to talk to.
So on this poll, you will read the whole spectrum of reactions. Everything from "this is great," "this seems totally legitimate," I agree with the results, it seems like it's fine, to "this is the worst things I've ever experienced, I hate this, I can't believe they did it, blah 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 blah." So you've got the full spectrum of reactions to this poll. Where do you kind of fall on that line, if you can tell us? And I mean, where does the poll fall short, etc.? Can you speak to that? I mean, I don't know how much you can speak to that, your opinions on that, but
yeah, well, ask me a more direct question.
What do you feel about the Redskins name, you personally? We know you don't speak for the Post. Do you think the Redskins should change their name?
And I have a good follow-up, too, yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, personally, whether I am a name proponent, I guess, it doesn't really matter. Because when I go to work, it's my job to write in the paper. It's not my job to write what I wish the facts were, right? I write what they are. So if the person I don't want to win the election in November, if that person triumphs, I still call that person president, or the paper is obligated to call them president next January. Same deal, right? The team's name is the Redskins. So anybody who works on the news side, not an opinion writer or a columnist, that's what we call them from a journalistic standpoint. Personally, I have a lot of common sense reactions to this. One is the argument. There are a lot of the same arguments come up over time, and there are a lot of good ones, and there are a lot of ones that I'm like, that's kind of shaky. One of the ones that comes up a lot is, if we were starting an expansion team from scratch, would we would we name a team that? Probably not, right? So really, and then what we're holding on to is tradition, right? And people, I think fans at least should be upfront enough to say, all right, I'm okay with 10% of the population feeling slurred if I get to hold on to my traditions, because that's really what it's about here. And the other argument, the best argument that doesn't get made is like a linguistic argument that, hey, nobody means a slur when they say Redskins when they're talking about the team, right? Like you call your friend a I don't know what kind of language is permissible on the.
We can say anything. We can say anything you want here.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Well, look, you call your friend a idiot, right? I'll keep it clean, right? You don't really think he's an idiot. He's just acting like an idiot, or he was being whatever yesterday.
He's just acting foolish is really what you're saying.
So words have meaning in context. And I don't feel like we talk about that very often when it comes to this. It's either the word means this or the word doesn't mean this, and people get locked in these. Well, back in the 1800s, it was used. All right, but when somebody's saying that, when they're rooting for their team, right, they're just rooting for the jersey and the colors,
right.
On the flip side, you could very easily change it to something that's not Redskins and still have the jersey, the font, the traditions, right? It's not like moving. It's not like moving the Supersonics to Oklahoma City, where all of a sudden you wipe clean the traditions of the franchise. You could change the name. And look, I know I'm rambling, but there's another good argument is, what kind of ownership does someone who owns a private company, even though it's a sports team, is kind of a public trust, right? Does the public get to make decisions, right? Did we get
right?
Did the public get to make Augusta admit a female member, even though it needed to be right? It was time, right? It's just kind of.
On the case of Augusta, I think no, the public didn't make them do anything.
Right. It's not, but it's also like as much pressure as we can put on, and you can protest. It's not our club, so it's not really our place to say. Same thing with the Redskins to a degree. It's not our team, so it's not our place to say. But at the same time, I mean, if you ask me personally, I completely sympathize, especially being a person of color. Like, I sympathize with the basic thought of, I don't want to be your mascot.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. So I wanted to ask you two specifically about the methodology of the poll, because it seems like a lot of people took offense with that. Now, it seemed like it was two things. It was over the phone, people didn't like that. And then people didn't like that it was only self-described or self-identified Native Americans. To me, that's the way a lot of polls are done. Logistically, that's how you do it. But a lot of people took offense to that methodology. So I wanted to ask you, do you agree with that? Or, was this a totally legitimate poll in the way that it was conducted?
Well, I'm not a polling expert, so I can't say like one way or the other. I didn't have any hand in doing the poll, so I don't want to put it out there that I'm speaking from an expert's point of view. But to me, right, there's at some point you get to a sample size, right? There were 504 people in the poll. If slightly more than half of them self-identified and the other half were enrolled members of tribes, then you have 250. And you're saying 10% of 250. Is that enough for you to call this statistically valid? That's choice for people to make. But I don't. What's been pretty consistent each time this poll has been run, no matter how the question's been phrased, no matter what kind of when the poll was done of DC sports fans, when the poll was done of general Americans, however the poll's done, people generally don't care. I mean, it's such a terrible, like it's just kind of I don't know if sad is the right word, but it's like. It's the folks who are really outraged about it have made some ground, right? There are people who now are, who feel like, we probably should change this. But it's not. It just hasn't been enough ground for it to catch hold, for it to financially impact the team, or for people to say, yes, we're going to make this change. Like The thing that's stark to me is when you see a profile of somebody from a reservation, or when you see a team named the Redskins and the local residents wear that with pride. And to be quite honest, when we're talking about Native American issues, we wouldn't be talking about this at all if it wasn't for this conscience. So in a way, the fact that the discussions get brought up, and I think there are some people who answered it in the articles that surround the poll, said, "Hey, look, the fact that we're talking about it is a good thing, even though
it's
the
raising
numbers,
awareness,
right? Even though the numbers aren't what we want to see."
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Hey, so are there any questions that you think? I mean, you said they kind of kept you out of the loop until the end. So I know fans, we were just surprised when that poll came out because no one thought that it was in the works. But are there any questions that you think they should have brought into the equation and weren't?
Not that I can think of. And look, two things you got to remember. One is this is an ongoing story. So everything that it's kind of just adding to the overall long tail of coverage that's happened over a course of a couple years. So whenever someone who covers us, and I deal primarily with the team from a covering the sports and covering the games and covering the transactions, and I deal with them more from that angle. But whenever someone feels like, hey, we haven't covered this angle, the thing I'm kind of proud of that the Post did is that they went back and said, okay, look, we haven't asked in a long time or ever, we haven't gotten a representative sample of Native Americans. So someone and the fact that project is in the works in a completely different department that I have very little knowledge of also speaks to how big the news organization is, that I can be every day intimately involved with Mike, Liz, and Master covering the team, and Jerry writing columns about it, and we're in Ashburn all the time, and that someone else can be working on something kind of completely different.
Yeah, it seemed to me that most people had a problem with the poll. The poll had the results were primarily that the majority of these Native Americans did not have a problem with the name, and most of the people that had a problem with the poll were those who did not support the name change. And I just think parenthetically that the Washington Post editorial board at least has a history of progressive leaning politics, and so if there's an agenda at all. It seems like it would have been an anti-name agenda, but really, my question to you really is: is the Redskins front office, do they feel emboldened, for lack of a better term, now that this poll is out in support of the name, or does it not change their feelings at all?
You would think that it would, right? I mean, you'd think.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not in direct contact with the front office. I'm like one level removed from people who talk. But I think that the team was happy with the results, and it showed, in their opinion, that the Post at least is fair over time. That there are times when someone at the Post has been the one kicking up dust over it, and then we cover it, from the other angle too. So I think in a lot of these stories, people get, I guess the proper term is confirmation bias. Like you read it, and you read the thing that you want to read, and then you're really. So I think a lot of people that are really keep the name were very happy to see this poll, and a lot of people that have been against it over time were the ones who are questioning the methodology of it. And I think that's probably just how it's going to be as long as this thing is in the news, because people are pretty much dug in. There's not a lot of people who come in on the middle of this thing and say, I don't feel one way or the other about the name. Most people are pretty dug in.
Sure.
Yeah, that's a great point. Well, we want to ask you just a couple questions about training camp, and then if you can indulge us, we'd love to talk about some tight end situation as well. But training camp wise, we just wanted to ask you, anything big in the works for the Post coverage of training camp coming up, or anything we should be on the lookout for, or?
The only noticeable difference on your end will be that Liz has covered like 5 or 7 Olympics, and she's going to be in Rio. So that means
tell her to bring her anti-Zika virus suit
for real,
and don't drink the water, and try to stay away from the militants that are trying to overthrow the government.
Be careful, Liz, if you're listening to this.
Look, she survived Beijing. She's survived what?
But Beijing, she's just dealing with pollution. See, now we've got pollution, we've got a deadly virus, and we've got militants all going on.
Giant snakes. Don't forget about the giant snakes in Brazil.
Again, though, if they made it out of Beijing and Sochi, they should be all right in Rio. Now there's
was a nightmare.
There's an assignment I wouldn't mind getting assigned to. If you want to send me to Brazil anytime, let me.
Hey, Mrs. McMillan is on the other end of the line here, and she's not too happy about that.
Yeah, she's calling in furious.
Just covering a lot of beach volleyball.
Again, though, you get sent on a trip and you end up working the whole time. You don't get that. Yeah. It's a lot of fun. I'm excited about the Olympics actually because it's only 1 hour time difference. So we're dealing with some kind of thing where we got to work late into the night or come in super early.
So the International Olympic Committee seems to hate us and refuses to put the Olympics in the U.S. So you're always dealing with like Asia and Australia and everywhere else.
Dude, there are 200 and some odd countries in the world, and we've had the Olympics in 96 and 02. Like it's okay to move them around.
It's okay to get with the U.S. superiority, Keith. We should have it every time because we're the
Steve's
U.S.
opinions are not endorsed by the Hogs Diet.
Hey, right. In all seriousness, a real question: what do you know about the Richmond training camp site controversy? Richmond has lost a lot of money. Training camp. The Redskins probably love it because they're getting paid to have training camp, somewhere. Should we expect big changes down the road in terms of the Richmond site?
Well, again, not speaking from a position of great knowledge on this because I haven't been, the reporter on the ground. I think it's fair to say that Richmond had big hopes for the Redskins coming in, and I don't think they're going to meet their hopes. Right? But the amount of publicity generated and the tourism dollars, I guess, or the tourism, just the interest in going to Richmond, or people have a reason to go to Richmond now. Maybe they feel like that was worth it. I think probably when the run is up. My guess, and again, it's just a guess that the Redskins would look for somewhere else. But having it for a team, having it out of town, having it be a destination, again, taking the team somewhere where they can just focus on it, and then having that deal be kind of financed by the other jurisdiction, so where the money doesn't come out of the team's pocket. So it's great. It's great for the team all around. As for the fan experience has been up and down, better some. Really, sometimes even day to day, like the fan appreciation day down there, the first year or maybe the second, they start to run together after a while. Was just like a madhouse, just so many people, and more than they were maybe equipped to handle. But you go on a lot of those days, or you go on the days when the Patriots were there, or the Texans were there. It's just a great experience. If you love football, you get close right up to your your favorite players. You don't pay a cent. You get to watch all that stuff. I mean, I think as a parent of kids and as someone who grew up liking football, that's a great experience. And you don't have to shell out, whatever it costs for club seats or loge seats or lower box or anything like that.
You just the answer to that is too much for anybody else to soda or something, and you're good to go.
Yeah. So are you going to help us get media passes to training camp this year, Keith? Man, you don't have to answer now. You can think about it.
We're counting on it.
When people always ask me, can you get free tickets or something, I say, if you go, you got to work.
Right.
Hey, and if Redskins PR is listening, we promise we will be good at training camp. We will cover the team fairly, and we love you, and we think you're doing an awesome, incredible job with the PR for the Redskins. So
I will not then ask about possibly.
Don't ask.
Getting passes to the arena football team when they come along.
So look, but in all honesty, we are reaching the era of journalism where you don't have to necessarily have a big title on your back to be a respected outlet of coverage, and teams are starting to recognize that over the past however many years it's been I guess SB Nation is still like it's still a big company as well, so that's not a great example. But there are blogs where,
for example, the Hogs Die.
Well, I'm saying there are instances across the NFL of teams recognizing that good coverage is being done by someone who's not necessarily with a big journalism organization.
The Redskins PR has helped us get interviews, and they actually have been good to us. And last year was the first time that the blogs were even on their media priority list. So the Redskins are coming around to it.
And look, don't confuse that for me for saying that there's not a difference between experienced journalists and someone.
We realize we're not experienced journalists.
We're not journalists at all.
Anyone can just come out of their old lawyer's office in Texas and be the best voice on the beat. But
come off there freshly.
I'm glad you've recognized who's the best on the beat, Keith. See.
But I mean, yeah, but I do think the cool thing about what we do is it's results oriented business, right?
Sure.
You read people over the course of time, and you get to know who's good at this, who's people have their favorites, but you kind of earn that respect every day. It's in a way, it's almost like that's one of the ways that reporters and players can relate, and there are probably a lot of ways they can't relate, so that it helps to have that. But that sometimes I say that to the reporters is that look, it's not about did you get this one scoop yesterday. If you're consistently good, you're the first name that pops into someone's head when something happens with the Redskins and they want to know more about it. That's when you're doing great.
Yeah.
And by the way, we don't consider ourselves journalists. By the way, we never have. This podcast is. Some podcasts out there want to be beat reporters, and that's not us. And we don't want to be that. We just want to cover the team
we
fairly.
We consider ourselves good podcasters. Let's be real, guys.
We're winging it.
We're just winging it most of the time.
Yeah. I appreciate your commitment to the truth.
See, we're aligned here. Well, I mean, with that, this has been an incredibly interesting interview. I feel like we could talk about this stuff all day, but do we want to move on to our tight end position breakdown?
I'm going to move on.
Yeah.
So let's do that. We've got an interesting group of tight ends, and we're really excited that you're here with us today, Keith, to talk about it, because I know you're going to have good insights on that. So I believe do we want to lead with our listener poll?
Sure.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's the Redskins position group breakdown. Insert graphic here. Okay. We have the listener poll this week. Oh, yeah, that's right. Insert audio file. We had Kermit do it last week. We have to have somebody else do it this week. Okay, here's the listener poll for this week. What kind of production will Vernon Davis give the Redskins this season? The 4 choices we had were he'll be an all-pro again, he's washed up, cut him in training camp, he's a marginal player, third string at best, or he will be a solid vet who helps the team. Those are the 4 choices. We had lots of good voting.
Wait, don't tell us the answers yet. Keith, do you want to venture a guess as to what you think most people would say to that question?
This is a weekly...
Most Redskins fans, by the way, so... Yeah.
Well, look, my opinion of Redskins fans is a little skewed because we run that poll every preseason what the record will be, and it's always like way like this year
12-4, yeah.
Right. Yeah. So I generally consider you to be an optimistic bunch, and not every team in the division is quite as optimistic as you are.
It's amazing considering how downtrodden and beat up we really are.
Yeah.
But I've also grown to appreciate over the past couple of years the temperament of the knowledgeable fans. So I say if someone listens to Hogstye, they're probably more likely to say either washed up or solid vet. I would say if we put this poll out to a general audience, they'd say Vernon Davis. He's gonna be back in a big way.
Yeah,
I would absolutely agree with Keith's assessment there. I think it's going to be probably average kind of player for us. Or washed up. I don't think.
Did you vote, Sean?
I did not vote.
Sean doesn't have Twitter, so how would he vote?
Oh, that's true.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so you said that everybody said he's going to be what, Sean? Washed up? Is that what you said?
I'm gonna say washed up. I think Keith said either washed up or standard vet. Right.
Okay.
I think he'll do the vet leadership thing personally, so that's what I'm getting. And I think most people. I'm a man of the people, so. I think most people voted that way.
Okay, this poll was actually had our widest discrepancy between first and second place of any poll we've ever done.
So a one-sided win is what you're saying?
It was very one-sided. 73% of the people said solid vet who helps the team.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
We got 73% of people to agree on something in this country. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, I know it is. Or you could get on, have them agree on presidential vote. 22% said he's a marginal player who's third string at best. 4% of the people said he needs to be cut and he's washed up. And the bold and incredibly optimistic person who thinks it's sunshine all the time said he'll be an all-pro.
So only one person said that?
Yeah, 1%. Yeah, at least.
So
1%.
so people really tempered there was no extremes. People were pretty much in the middle there.
Yeah, almost everybody was in the middle, and we had remarkably few comments this time from normal weeks, which meant that everybody kind of agrees.
Well, when our polling question's about the third string tight end.
Yeah.
I said it, we can't all be winners. I can't come up with a great poll every single week. Okay. All right. We'll only do one comment this week because we've got to move on. The UDFA podcast actually responded to us and said he's a solid bet. A solid vet, but most contributions will be off the field in the locker room. So I think that was the prevailing thought for the poll.
Interesting. I would probably agree with that too.
Yeah.
Hey, you have podcast rivals?
No, they're just they've never responded to us before. Actually, I don't know. They are. I'm sure they're an incredible podcast, and everybody needs to listen to the what was it again? UDFA podcast.
We do, and by the way, we do have podcast rivals. We have we can't name names, but we have podcasts try to poach members from the Hogstye.
Yeah, we don't want to go there. No. In terms of tight end position group breakdown, though, let's get into tight end position group breakdown. On the roster here, we have Jordan Reed, of course, Logan Paulson, Niles Paul, Marcel Jensen, Vernon Davis, Derek Carrier, and I'm just going to throw another name in there who's a little interesting. A guy, Cody Booth, who he played 3 years of tight end at Temple and then 1 year of offensive line in his senior year. So I'm not 100% sure how he should be categorized. Spotrac has him as a tight end. The Redskins have him as an offensive line. So I'll throw him out there. So right now our starter,
no one's going to have opinions on him anyway.
Probably not.
Well, our
starter Jordan Reed.
Temple, but,
what is everybody's thoughts on Jordan Reed as our number one tight end?
Well, duh. I'll kick us off.
I don't know. Niles Paul was the number one tight end going into last year.
Yeah. So
remember this.
I mean, we got to find out what Keith says, but I mean, to me, Jordan Reed's obviously the number one, and I think it's going to be interesting to see what kind of playing time Vernon Davis ends up with, because it's probably going to be between Niles and Vernon in terms of who gets more playing time, I would say, after Reed. So that would be my assumption, but Keith, I mean, give us your thoughts on this.
So you want me to give just thoughts on Jordan Reed, or you want me to do the whole group?
Go with Jordan Reed right now.
Go with Jordan Reed, yeah.
So I think the thing with Reed is health. And you guys saw last year, 14 games, 11 touchdowns. I mean, just, you get inside the 10 and it's going there and nobody can stop it. Mm-hmm. It's a pretty big deal, especially when you add Josh Dotson this year. I imagine around the goal line, he'll probably come in for Deshaun, who is really effective in the middle of the field, but not as effective inside the 20s. Sure. So now you have Dotson on one side. You have Pierre, who we know can take a hit and catch a touchdown pass, and you have Jordan Reed. I think it's gonna make him super effective inside the red zone, and you guys are gonna the team is probably gonna a lot more 7s than 3s, and I think it's one of my long held personal beliefs is one good way to lose a game is to kick a bunch of field goals. Drive up and down the field and then kick field goals, and then you're traded 3 for 7, or you drive twice and you get 6, and then they make one lucky play and it's 7-6. Anyway, I think Reed is going to be helpful there, but he's just got to stay healthy, and that's the main thing. Sure. I also think Reed is a big part of Kirk Cousins' success.
Yeah,
and
it's definitely a favorite target.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the two. If Kirk Cousins doesn't stay healthy, that impacts Jordan Reed. If Jordan Reed doesn't stay healthy, that impacts Kirk Cousins. So as last year, I think the thing you hope is that last year wasn't the best you'll ever see from the two of them. Cousins playing 16 games, Reed playing 14, and those two having a very good connection. You want them to stay healthy going forward, and to be able to kind of build on what they did last year.
Including the playoffs, I think they broke 1,000 yards, those two together. So,
Well, yeah, including the playoffs, that is true. What's interesting about Jordan Reed from a statistical perspective is that he's trending up. He's trended up every year in a lot of things. We went from 9 games played in 2013 to 11 in 2014. As Keith said, 14 in 2015. He's trended up in receptions, 45 to 50 to 87. Yards per reception, he's kind of stayed the same. He hasn't gone down. 11.1 in 2013. Trended down a little bit, 9.3 in 2014. 10.9 last year. Touchdowns have gone up. This is a player who's gotten better and better and better as time goes on.
Hey.
And of course...
sorry. I was just gonna say. You said, did you include his averages there too, or
average for what?
Average per catch? Did you have that in there?
I did. 11.1 yards per
sorry,
reception. Yeah. Now, from a salary cap perspective, he's got a 5-year contract, total value $46.75 million, $22 million guaranteed. He's got a $3.4 million cap hit this year. Huge dead cap number. He's not going anywhere anytime soon. So he is paid as someone who's expected to perform, and there's no doubt. And I'm going somewhere with this, so we'll
trust you on.
Yeah, well, he's 6'3", 236. Just keep that in the back of your head. Now Niles Paul is next up as the number 2 tight end. He's 6'1", 225. Obviously, he missed all of last year, but this is a guy.
But prior to that, let's be clear, right? Prior to that, he was assumed to be the starter, right? And Jordan Reed had some questions about being on this.
Yeah, listen to these numbers: 12.5 yards per reception, 19 yards per reception, 12.8, 13.0. That's Niles Paul's yards per reception over the course of his career, aside from last year. What do you think about Niles?
Yeah, that's the question.
Well, the first thing when you're dealing with Niles Paul, and I think ranking him as the number 2 is the correct spot to put him in, that he's probably the second most safest roster spot, is that you can't just talk about him as just a receiving tight end, right? Because he's someone who's bulked up over his, came out of the draft as a wide receiver, is now bulked up to where he's considered a good blocker. He's probably the guy who's going to be the fullback when they need a fullback. Or at least he wants to be. He's shown some chops as a receiver, and then he's a locker room leader and a special teamer. Right. So he's got a spot on the roster. As to what his role will be, who knows? I think that probably depends largely on how good and how helpful Vernon Davis and Logan Paulson and Derek Carrier are.
Hey Keith, you played secondary in college, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. Did you ever have to go up against teams with this kind of like good tandem at tight end, and like? Just how much of a nightmare is that for when you're playing to kind of just, deal with knowing that that's what's going to be in store for you?
Well, I played in the mid-'90s. I'm old. So, the stand-up tight end wasn't quite as in vogue then. I definitely remember going up against, I'm 6'2" and change, maybe 6'3", and I was at my my best, I was like 191 pounds or something like that playing. And I remember going up against guys who are, 6'5", 6,
but
two,
you had good
two,
height for
2 and change.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that was one of the advantages of when a team had a big jump ball receiver, I'd get to stick that guy the whole game. But the tight end, the thing to me, because I was skinny and I wasn't a big hitter. I tried, but I just wasn't. Is seeing that tight end catch like a short pass, like an arrow or like some short route, and then turn around and get a head of steam. That's the ones that I never liked, because fullback and a tight end with a head of steam, you're basically you got to go low.
Well, you've got 6'6", 250 coming at you at full speed.
Right.
So you're getting bowled over, and you just got to hold on.
Right, that part for me personally was the challenge, and I played corner for 3 years, and I played free safety my senior year. So you get matched up over the slot and over the tight end a lot when you're a free safety. But like I said, covering them was not the worry, and I think that's the big difference between what the Redskins have. Jordan Reed, you got a guy who can run routes as well as a wide receiver, but he has it's not just the height. It's the range of his arms. He can pull in a pass that some guys just can't catch. The athleticism is
the term that Vard, I guess, is his catch radius.
Yeah. So in other words, you can be on him at your coverage could be pretty decent, but if the ball's put in the right place, nobody can get it but Reed.
Right.
And Kirk Cousins is accurate enough; he can throw that over the middle, and you can have a guy draped on him, and someone can make the catch. So that. Again, from a coverage standpoint, you sometimes just nothing you can do about that. If the ball is put between you and the body is between you, like I said, you can go over and maybe you can swipe your hand down and try to knock it out of their hands. But other than that, some passes, if they're put in the right place, you got no chance, no matter how good your coverage is.
Yeah. And just from a salary cap perspective, Niles Paul is in the second year of a 3-year contract, $6 million contract, $2.25 million guaranteed. He's got a cap hit this year of almost 1.6 million, and so he's again another guy who's paid to produce, although certainly not at the Jordan Reed.
Yeah, we're not
level.
breaking the bank on him. It's a pretty good deal for a
and his dead cap number is only $666,000. So if the worst happens. and they could get rid of him, and it would be okay. Just again, well, no, they're not. And keep this number in mind. He's 6'1", 225.
Mm-hmm. Actually, I pull off for their website 242. I think he's put on some.
Okay, well, this is Spotrac. We'll go with. He's probably bigger than 225. Spotrac had him listed at 225. He's probably more like 240. Like you said.
Yeah.
Well, and Niles is one of those guys who at least last season, I believe last season we did the story, right, where Trent Williams was losing 27 pounds and Niles Paul had put on 27 pounds in the offseason because he wanted to bulk up. And it's,
how much of that was just put on in beard weight? Because he's got that crazy beard right now.
Yeah, that's pretty glorious.
We compared him to a wildling from the Game of Thrones last week. If there was an African American wildling, I think he would be it.
I just think
Niles of the House Paul.
He's I just think he's a real safe roster spot. You mentioned the salary, but I think the special teams and the locker room leadership.
Football player.
Scott, core guy. Yep. Football player. Yep.
So let's talk Vernon Davis, our number 3 tight end. Presumed number 3. He's on a 1-year deal, $2.4 million. His cap hit this year is $2.38 million. He does have a guarantee of $1.1 million. Which means he's got that dead cap of $1.1 million. But obviously, I think we know his history. He's been an All-Pro tight end. Throughout the years. Yeah, 2-time Pro Bowler. He was very, very productive in San Francisco for many years. If you look down his numbers, and you average it out, he's probably averaging between 50 and 65 catches a year, every year. He ran a sub 4.40 back in his high water mark.
Yeah, back in Maryland.
Yeah, he's a native of the District of Columbia. Went to Dunbar High School in D.C. Went to Maryland. The fans are excited about him. So the question really with Vernon Davis is, can he capture any of his former glory? And I'll just say, before I turn it over to you guys, everybody said last year was a disaster for him, but in reality, we had 58 targets, 38 receptions, 395 yards, 10.4 yards per reception. Not horrible numbers. So what do y'all think of Vernon Davis? Keith?
Well, yeah, you look his numbers from last year. He's switching teams mid-season. I think is it's hard to make too much of the numbers. I think they thought he would make a bigger impact in Denver, but looking at it holistically, the Denver probably had quarterback issues as much as they had tight end issues last season. I have no idea what to make of what Vernon Davis's role on the team will be, and I think anybody that tells you they do is either just prognosticating a little bit or getting ahead of themselves, because we just don't know training camp wise where he's going to slot. Logan Paulson's obviously reliable at what he does, and then Derek Carrier. Maybe the 5th guy in this, but someone they gave up a draft pick for.
Right.
So, how soon do you want to cut a guy? I don't even know if the draft pick is conveyed yet, whether it was this year or next year.
Yeah, I think it's a 5th rounder too. It's a pretty high draft pick.
It's a 5th rounder next year. Now, so you bring in Vernon Davis. McMillan knows him well from San Francisco. You could have worse guys. I mean, for your 3rd tight end, right? I mean, athletically, he was at one time a specimen, and I'm sure he probably still is to a degree. So it's probably just where his mindset is and how much he is content with giving the team. Being someone who's born and raised around here, probably we haven't had a chance to talk to him much yet. But he's probably thrilled to be playing for the Redskins, and if he goes hard, you could maybe get some splash plays from him without having the huge numbers, because Reed will tally up most of the numbers.
Sure. I mean, I kind of wonder about, is he just the great insurance policy that we desperately needed last year? I mean, who were our tight ends at one point last year? We had
everybody as a tight end. We had all of them.
Yeah.
At one point.
Yeah. I think we had more tight ends on injured reserve than than there were free agent tight ends at one point.
Yeah.
But, I mean, that's what I look at him as, is he might not get in a lot of games, but Reed's probably going to miss 1 or 2. Niles Paul will probably miss 1 or 2. It's a position where you get hurt. So having a very good, maybe not as athletically talented as he once was, tight end, he's a great insurance policy.
Yeah, I think it's a big mystery, like Keith said. Who knows what he's going to produce. He certainly has the back and forth. And just bear this in mind, he's 6'3", 250. Like Keith mentioned, Derek Carrier, we'll do him real fast. He has very little history in San Francisco. This is just a guy. He's 6'3", 238. roughly. He's got a 3-year contract.
Didn't even think he was that big.
Yeah. He's in the second year of a 3-year contract, $2.98 million. But his cap hit's very small, only $900,000.
Right.
And he's got a real small guarantee number too.
And he's a D3 guy like Keith.
Belvoir College.
Yeah.
So yeah, Belvoir, wherever that is, don't know.
I'm pretty sure it's Beloit, Wisconsin.
Beloit?
Right?
Okay. Beloit. Okay.
but I appreciate
Keith was going with Steve was going.
That
with
was
the French
so diplomatic, Keith. That was such a pleasant correction.
I thought Belvoir sounded more formal and
Refined.
French.
Look, it just tells you what kind of places Steve frequents down there in Texas. He likes the high-class French restaurant.
I think if you
catch him at Arby's,
you'd know I'd rather be in the Greasy Spoon Burger place than that. And then the last guy, of course, we have the Apostle Logan Paulson, who never seems to go anywhere and who's always on the roster.
My man from 2012.
Yeah. Now, here's where I'm going with the heights. He's 6'5", 260. The last guy we...
The tallest one.
The last guy we have is Marcel Jensen, who is 6'6", 260. The first four guys I listed were all between 6'1" and 6'3". The only two guys that have traditional tight end size are Marcel Jensen and Logan Paulson.
Right.
Logan Paulson's been here for a while. He's almost 30 years old. He's 29 now. Marcel Jensen is 26 years old. So I'm wondering here if what we're looking at is a roster that carries 4 tight ends.
With one being that true blocking style tight end, basically.
Right. Yeah, I wonder if Logan Paulson and Marcel Jensen are competing for the fourth and last tight end spot. It's possible.
Maybe.
What do you think?
I think I wouldn't be surprised if Logan Paulson makes the team. For the reasons you mentioned, one because they won't carry a fullback this year, no Darryl Young, so there's a fourth spot on the offensive side probably does become a fourth tight end, either that or a 6th receiver or a 10th offensive lineman.
Right.
But also too, Logan Paulson isn't a guy you draft for your fantasy team, but a real life team you want a blocking tight end, especially if they're going to go double tight a lot.
Right.
And they're saying, you may see 3 tight ends if you get down in the goal line or short yardage.
We have enough. We could do a 5 tight end set. Let's do that.
5 tight end set.
Well, if Tom Compton had still been around, we could have done that.
I'm just trying to figure out how many guys would have to be on the line and how you would line up tight end as flanker.
The whole line goes out for a pass.
The thing with Marcel Jensen is he's got a 3-year contract himself.
Yeah.
It's one of these min salary contracts, nothing guaranteed, but they did think enough of him to sign him up for 3 years last year, and he's still around.
So you're suggesting that he could be, as kind of a surprise training camp replacement.
I think Marcel Jensen may be my tight end dark horse as someone who could come in and replace Logan Paulson as our blocking tight end.
I mean, I will say that you guys picked a fascinating position to talk about today because you have potentially 4 roster spots. If you include Marcel Jensen now, you're looking at maybe 6 guys with a chance to make the roster. You mentioned Cody Booth, too. Yeah. I think when you go down to training camp or when Robbie goes, right, he's the one who's there all the time.
Yeah, Robbie.
Have him spend a lot of time looking at the tight ends because you got Bill Callahan and McVay and Gruden who will say on the record they like to go multiple tight end formations. Right. You have guys that for one reason or another are here that the GM has great interest in. Right, he brought Carrier, he brought Vernon Davis here, and then you have guys who've been kind of old reliables in Niles Paul and Logan Paulson. So I don't know who makes the roster. I don't know if I've ever seen a team keep 5 tight ends, but you could certainly make a case for at least 5 guys.
Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of quality in that group this year.
And none of these guys, with Cody Booth, could be a practice squad candidate, I suppose. But none of the rest of these guys are practice squad.
I think
none of the rest of these guys are practice squad candidates. Somebody's going to get at least 1, probably 2 are going to get cut off this list.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and look, some of your tight ends, your number 2, number 3 tight end. If you're going to be in the 4th tight end, you got to be a glue guy, right? You got to play special teams. Right. You have to bring some usefulness to the roster besides your 10 catches that you're going to have during the season.
You need to know that you have to have those special packages that you're involved in, basically.
Oh, I mean, I think field goal team and kick return, all that kind of stuff. Those, second and third tight end, you have to play a lot of that stuff.
Well, It makes sense. I think we're probably ready to wrap it up there, or close to. Steve, I know you have a little bit of a follow-up from last week's
I wanted to
episode.
clarify something real fast. We talked last
Please
week
do.
about how the Redskins trainer lost their laptop and lost a couple thousand medical records, in the process. And we talked about the HIPAA effects. I did look a little bit into. First of all, I mistakenly spelled it wrong. It's actually HIPAA. I think I said HIPPA. But more importantly, I did look into HIPAA a little bit. And as it turns out, there's no private cause of action for HIPAA, meaning a player can't sue the Redskins directly for violating HIPAA. They obviously would still have a regular negligence cause of action if for losing a record. But more to the point here is there are civil and criminal penalties that can be assessed by the federal government up to $50,000 per occurrence. On the civil side, and so if you multiply that by 2,000 player medical records lost,
I was told there'd be no math.
The potential, at least, and the fines are up to 50,000, but the potential, at least, is for a massive fine if the federal government so chose. Which is why the Redskins were so careful in their statement, saying they pinky swore that there were no HIPAA violations. So that was the clarification from that last week.
So now you know, folks at home. Now you know, a little clarification.
That's the Steve legal clarification of the week.
Yeah, couldn't get through an episode without Steve rambling about some boring topic for a few seconds. Just kidding, Steve. We love you, and we love things like HIPAA. Keep talking about it. On that note, we'll wrap the episode there. I want to say another quick thank you to Keith, because Keith, this was like a really, really, really cool interview. You had some awesome stuff to say about the Post's coverage of the team and everything we talked about, so thank you so much for being with us. It's at D3Keith on Twitter. His podcast is Around the Nation if you want to check that out, and of course, you can always find him over on the Washington Post, so check that out. Keith, thank you so much, man.
No problem, guys.
Yeah. Great talking to you.
And we will see you all next week. Take care.